The estate agent's face went white when she looked at me standing on the doorstep. "Mrs. Whitmore," she stammered, clutching her clipboard. "What are you doing here?" I stared past her into the front hallway of my mother's house. The house where I'd grown up, the house where my mother had lived for 43 years. The house my brother Richard told me was still on the market, waiting for the right buyer. Except it wasn't waiting. It was sold. There were removal men carrying furniture out the front door. A young couple stood in the garden, pointing at the rose bushes my mother had planted the year I was born. The woman was pregnant, laughing, talking about paint colors for the nursery. "I'm here," I said slowly, my voice remarkably steady considering my legs felt like water, "because this is my mother's house. And according to my brother, the executor of her estate, it hasn't been sold yet." The estate agent's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Mrs. Whitmore, this property completed 9 months ago, June 15th. I handled the sale myself 9 months ago, June 15th. 2 weeks after my mother's funeral, I felt something cold settle in my stomach, spreading through my chest like frost across a window. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Richard told me just last month that the house was still on the market. He said the probate was complicated. That's why I haven't received my inheritance yet." The estate agent bit her lip, glanced at the young couple who were now watching us with growing concern, and lowered her voice. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think you need to speak to a solicitor, because this house sold for $520,000, and the entire amount went to the executor. To your brother. That's when I knew. Standing there on the doorstep of my childhood home, watching strangers carry away my mother's life in cardboard boxes, I knew with absolute certainty that my brother had stolen everything, and I was about to discover the betrayal was so much worse than I could have imagined. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please leave a comment and let me know what country or city you're in. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Her Side of the Story for more stories about women who discovered the truth just in time and fought back with everything they had. My name is Judith Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, a retired primary school teacher, and I live in a modest terraced house in Bristol. I'm a widow. My husband Thomas died of a stroke 7 years ago. We never had children, but we had a good life together. Quiet, honest, simple. I have one sibling, my older brother Richard. He's 71, a solicitor, married to a woman called Karen who I've never particularly warmed to, though I've always been polite. They live in a large, detached house in Bath, the kind with electric gates and a gravel drive that crunches importantly when you pull up. Richard and I were never especially close, but we weren't estranged either. We saw each other at family occasions, birthdays, Christmas. We were civil, respectful, the way siblings often are when they've simply grown into different lives. Our mother, Elizabeth Whitmore, died 18 months ago at the age of 93. She'd been in declining health for several years, but she was sharp as a tack right until the end. She lived independently in her 3-bedroom, semi-detached house in Clifton, the house our father had bought in 1978, the house we'd grown up in. I'd visited her every week without fail. Wednesday afternoons like clockwork. I'd bring her shopping, help her with the garden, sit with her over tea and listen to her stories about the war, about our father, about the neighbors. Richard visited perhaps once a month, always briefly, usually with Karen in tow looking at her watch. When Mother died, Richard and I sat together in her kitchen the day after the funeral. The will had already been read. Mother's solicitor had made it very clear. Everything was to be split equally between Richard and me, 50-50. No ambiguity. The estate was substantial. Mother had been careful with money her whole life. There was the house, worth at least $500,000. Her savings account with $87,000. Premium. Bonds worth $42,000. Shares. And investments totaling another $73,000. A small pension pot of $28,000 in total. Just over $730,000. My half should have been $365,000. I'll handle everything, Richard had said that day in Mother's kitchen, his voice gentle, reassuring. As executor, it's my responsibility. Probate can be complicated, Judith. All the legal paperwork, the tax implications, the property sale. You don't need to worry about any of it. I'll take care of everything. I'd been grateful, relieved even. I was grieving. The thought of navigating solicitors and estate agents and HMRC forms felt overwhelming. Thank you, I'd said. I don't know what I'd do without you. Richard had smiled. The same smile I'd trusted my entire life. That's what family is for, he'd said. That was 18 months ago. In that time, Richard had sent me exactly 4 checks. The first arrived 3 months after Mother died, $5,000. The note attached said, initial distribution. More to follow once probate clears. The second came 2 months later. $3,200. Partial distribution after estate taxes. The third arrived after Christmas. $2,800. Further distribution. Property sale pending. The fourth, just 6 weeks ago. $4,000. Final partial payment. Complications with tax assessment. In total, I'd received $15,000 from an estate worth $730,000 from an inheritance that should have been $365,000 every time. I'd called Richard to ask about the delay. He'd had an explanation ready, smooth, professional, laced with legal terminology I didn't quite understand. Inheritance tax is 40% on anything over the threshold, Judith. The estate has been absolutely hammered by HMRC. The property market's been slow. We can't just give the house away. There were outstanding debts we didn't know about. Mother's care costs in her final year. It all has to be settled before final distribution. I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my brother. He was a solicitor. He was the executor. This was his area of expertise, but standing on that doorstep, learning the house had sold 9 months ago for $520,000, something inside me shifted. If the house sold in June for $520,000, where was my share? If the estate had been hammered by inheritance tax, why was Richard still sending me tiny checks and claiming everything was tied up in complications? I drove home in a fog. My hands shook on the steering wheel. When I pulled into my drive, I sat in the car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, my mind racing. That evening, I did something I should have done months ago. I called a solicitor, not Richard's firm, obviously. A different one. A small practice in Redland that my friend Margaret had used when her husband died. The woman who answered was called Sarah Chen. She was young, maybe 40, with a direct manner that I found oddly comforting. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, after I'd explained the situation. Do you have copies of your mother's will, the grant of probate, and any estate accounts your brother has provided? I have the will, I said. Richard gave me a copy, but I've never seen any estate accounts. He just sends checks with little notes. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Whitmore, as a beneficiary of the estate, you are legally entitled to a full accounting. Your brother, as executor, is required by law to provide transparent records of all estate transactions. If he hasn't done that, that's a serious red flag. My stomach tightened. What should I do? First, request a full estate accounting in writing. Send it recorded delivery. If he refuses or delays, we can apply to the probate court to compel him. But before we do that, I'd like you to gather every document you have. Every check he sent, every note, every text message or email. Can you do that? Yes, I said. Yes, I can do that. That night, I pulled out every piece of paper related to Mother's estate. I organized them on my kitchen table. The will, the 4 checks, Richard's notes, a few brief emails. Then I did something else. I went online and searched for the land registry. For 3, I could download the official record of who owned Mother's house and when it had been sold. The document loaded slowly on my ancient computer. When it appeared on the screen, I had to read it 3 times before my brain accepted what I was seeing. Property sold, 15th of June, 2023 sale price, $520,000 buyer, Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Sophie Cartwright seller, estate of Elizabeth Ann Whitmore, represented by Richard James Whitmore, executor. The money had gone somewhere. $520,000 had changed hands 9 months ago, and I'd received $15,000. Where was the other $505,000? More importantly, where was the money from Mother's savings, her investments, her bonds, her pension? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's face across Mother's kitchen table, smiling, reassuring me he'd take care of everything. The next morning, I drafted a letter to Richard. Dear Richard, as a beneficiary of Mother's estate, I am formally requesting a full and detailed accounting of all estate assets, liabilities, and distributions. This should include bank statements, sale documents for the property, details of all taxes paid, and a complete breakdown of how the estate has been administered. I would appreciate receiving this information within 14 days. Yours sincerely, Judith. I sent it recorded delivery. 3 days later, Richard called. His voice was tight, clipped, not the warm, patient tone he usually used with me. Judith, what's this letter about? Why are you suddenly demanding accounts? Don't you trust me? I just want to understand where everything stands, I said, keeping my voice calm. The estate agent told me Mother's house sold in June. That was 9 months ago. I'd like to know where my share is. Silence. Then, the estate agent had no business discussing that with you. Richard, I'm entitled to know. I'm a beneficiary. Just send me the accounts. Another pause. Fine. I'll have my secretary put something together. But Judith, you need to understand, the estate was complicated. There were significant debts. Mother's care home fees, outstanding bills, legal costs. It's not as simple as just dividing everything in half. Then show me, I said. Show me the bills. Show me where the money went. I will, he said coldly. You'll have your precious accounts. He hung up. 2 weeks passed. Nothing arrived. I called Sarah Chen. He's stalling, she said. We need to apply to the probate court for an order compelling him to provide the accounts. But Mrs. Whitmore, I think we should also do some investigating on our own. Would you be willing to pay for a forensic accountant to review what we can access publicly? Yes, I said without hesitation. Whatever it costs. The forensic accountant's name was David Lambert. He was in his 50s, methodical, with the kind of mind that found patterns in chaos. It took him 2 weeks when he called me into Sarah Chen's office to present his findings. I knew from his expression that it was bad. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Your brother has systematically embezzled your mother's entire estate. I stared at the folder. I couldn't open it. Not yet. How much? I whispered. The total estate value was $731,420, David said. After legitimate inheritance tax of approximately $140,000, the net estate should have been around $591,000. Split equally, you should have received $295,500. How much have I received? $15,000. The room tilted slightly. Where did the rest go? David opened the folder and began laying out documents. The house sold for $520,000 on June 15th, as you discovered. That money went into the estate account your brother controlled. It should have stayed there until distribution. Instead, 3 days after the sale completed, your brother transferred $480,000 to his personal account. He slid a bank statement across the desk. There it was in black and white. A transfer from estate of E. Whitmore to R.J. Whitmore personal account. Your mother's savings account held $87,340. Your brother closed it 4 weeks after her death and transferred the entire amount to himself. Another statement. The premium bonds, shares, and pension were all liquidated within 2 months of her death. Total value, $143,680, all transferred to your brother's accounts. More statements. More transfers, all to Richard. In total, David said quietly, your brother has taken approximately $701,000 from your mother's estate. He's given you $15,000 in small installments to create the appearance of ongoing estate administration. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed. Sarah Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, this isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud. Your brother has committed executor fraud, embezzlement, and theft. We need to report this to the police. He's a solicitor, I managed to say. How could he think he'd get away with this? David Lambert shook his head slowly. In my experience, family members often do get away with it. Beneficiaries trust the executor. They don't ask questions. By the time they realize something's wrong, evidence has been destroyed, money has been spent, and it's too late. Your brother was counting on you never checking, never asking, never doubting him. But I did, I said softly. You did, Sarah agreed. And now we're going to make sure he faces every consequence. If you're still watching, please take a moment to subscribe to her side of the story and share this video with anyone who needs to hear it. Stories like this save people from being taken advantage of by the people they trust most. The police took my statement 3 days later. Detective Constable Morrison was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not going to lie to you. Cases like this can be complicated. Your brother will argue it was all legitimate estate expenses. He'll produce receipts, invoices, legal fees. He'll say you misunderstood. But the money went into his personal account, I said. Not estate accounts, his personal account. I know, she said, and that's where we'll get him. The investigation took 4 months. During that time, I existed in a strange kind of limbo. I went about my normal life, grocery shopping, meeting friends for coffee, tending my small garden. But underneath, I was hollow, betrayed in a way I couldn't articulate. This wasn't a stranger who'd conned me. This was my brother, my flesh and blood, the boy I'd grown up with, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding after our father died. He'd looked me in the eye for 18 months and lied. During those 4 months, Richard tried to contact me exactly once. A letter arrived, handwritten, 5 pages long. Judith, I don't know what lies these solicitors and accountants have been telling you, but you need to understand the truth. The estate was nowhere near as valuable as you think. Mother had significant debts, care home fees, medical bills, credit cards we didn't know about. The house needed extensive repairs before it could be sold, which cost tens of thousands. I have been working tirelessly to maximize what little remains. The small distributions I've sent you represent the actual available funds after all legitimate estate expenses. If you pursue this ridiculous investigation, you'll only waste what's left on legal fees. You're being manipulated by people who want to profit from family conflict. Please, let's sit down together and talk about this properly. We're family. We shouldn't let outsiders destroy that. Your brother Richard I read it once. Then I put it in a folder labeled Evidence and gave it to D.C. Morrison. She called me 2 weeks later. We've executed search warrants on your brother's home and office. We've seized his computers, his files, his bank records. Mrs. Whitmore, what we found is damning. My heart began to pound. What did you find? Your brother didn't just steal from your mother's estate. He's been doing this for years. We've found evidence of at least 4 other estates where he was executor or attorney. Same pattern. Small distributions to beneficiaries while he pocketed the rest. We estimate he's embezzled over $2 million in the past decade. I sat down heavily. £2 million? He and his wife have been living well beyond their legitimate income for years. The house and bath, the new cars every 2 years, luxury holidays, private school fees for their grandchildren. It was all funded by stolen estate money. What happens now? He'll be arrested and charged. Executor fraud, theft, money laundering, possibly perjury if he's lied in court documents. Mrs. Whitmore, your brother is looking at serious prison time. Richard was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I know because it was all over the local news by lunchtime. Prominent Bath solicitor arrested in estate fraud investigation. The headlines were everywhere. The Bristol Post, the Bath Chronicle, even the BBC local news. By evening, the Solicitors Regulation Authority had suspended his practicing certificate pending investigation. Karen called me that night. I almost didn't answer. How could you do this? She hissed down the phone. He's your brother. You've destroyed him, destroyed us. Do you have any idea what this means for our family? He stole from me, I said quietly. He stole from our mother's memory. He stole from at least 4 other families. He deserves everything that's coming. It wasn't stealing, she spat. He was managing the estates. He was entitled to executor fees. You're too stupid to understand how estate law works. Then he'll explain it to the judge, I said, and hung up. The trial took place 9 months later. Richard pleaded not guilty. His barrister argued that everything had been legitimate estate management, that the transfers to his personal account were temporary, that he'd fully intended to distribute the funds properly once all debts were settled, the prosecution dismantled, his defense piece by piece, bank records showing Richard had immediately spent the stolen money on personal expenses. Emails between Richard and Karen discussing which car to buy with mother's money, text messages. The old Batts estate cleared. We're set for the villa in Spain. Evidence from 4 other families he'd stolen from, each telling the same story I'd told. The jury was out for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge's sentencing remarks were scathing. Mr. Whitmore, you abused a position of profound trust. You exploited grieving families at their most vulnerable. You stole not just money, but peace of mind, family harmony, and the legacies that deceased individuals worked their entire lives to leave behind. Your actions as a solicitor make your crimes even more reprehensible. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway, repeatedly, over many years. Richard was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Karen sobbed in the gallery. I sat perfectly still. He was also ordered to pay back every penny he'd stolen, though the prosecution acknowledged that much of it had already been spent. The Solicitors Regulation Authority struck him off permanently. He would never practice law again. As Richard was led away, he looked at me once, not with remorse, not with apology, with hatred. I looked right back at him and didn't flinch. The financial recovery took another year. Richard and Karen's house in Bath was sold. Their cars, their jewelry, their investments, everything was seized and liquidated. In the end, I recovered $287,000 of the $295,000 I should have inherited. Not everything, but enough. The other families he'd stolen from recovered varying amounts. Some more, some less, depending on how much Richard had already spent. But there was one more piece to this story. One more person whose life had been shattered by Richard's crimes. Tyler. Tyler was Richard's grandson. 12 years old. His mother, Richard's daughter Claire, had died of cancer 3 years earlier. Tyler's father had never been in the picture. Richard and Karen had been raising him. Now Richard was in prison. Karen, financially ruined and unable to cope, had moved in with her sister in Scotland, leaving Tyler behind. Social services contacted me on a Wednesday afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore, Tyler has no other family. His grandmother is unwilling to take him. We're looking at foster placement unless a relative can step forward. I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. I'll take him, I said. The social worker paused. Are you sure? Given everything your brother has done to you, we'd understand if— Tyler didn't do anything to me, I interrupted. He's 12 years old. He's lost his mother, his grandfather's in prison, and his grandmother abandoned him. He's innocent in all of this. 2 weeks later, Tyler moved into my spare bedroom. He was quiet at first, wary. His whole world had collapsed, and I was part of the family that had caused it, even if I was also a victim, but slowly, carefully. We built something. I enrolled him in the local secondary school. I helped him with homework. I learned to cook the foods he liked. I took him to football matches and cinema trips, and slowly, gradually, watched him begin to smile again. One evening, about 6 months after he'd moved in, we were sitting at the kitchen table. He was doing maths homework and I was reading. Aunt Judith? He said quietly. Yes, love? Why did you take me in? After everything Granddad did to you? I put down my book and looked at him properly. Because you're not your grandfather, Tyler. You're not responsible for his choices. And because family should mean something. Real family, the kind that shows up when it matters, not the kind that steals from you. His eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry for what he did, he whispered. I know, sweetheart. But you have nothing to apologize for. He nodded, wiped his eyes, and went back to his homework. It's been 3 years now since I stood on the doorstep of my mother's house and learned my brother had sold it 9 months earlier. 3 years since I discovered he'd stolen over $700,000 from our mother's estate. Richard is still in prison. He served 4 years of his 12-year sentence. Karen divorced him last year. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she's trying to rebuild her life in Scotland, though the shame of what Richard did follows her everywhere. Tyler is 15 now. He's doing well in school. He plays football for the local team. He has friends, a life, a future. Last month, he asked if he could officially change his surname to Whitmore. Not Richard's branch of the family, but mine, Thomas's name. I want to be part of your family, he said. The real one, the honest one. I cried when I signed the paperwork. Sometimes people ask me if I regret turning Richard in. If I feel guilty that my actions put him in prison, destroyed his marriage, ruined his life, I don't. Not for a single second. What Richard did wasn't just theft. It was a betrayal of everything family is supposed to mean. He looked me in the eye month after month and lied while spending our mother's money on holidays and cars and a lifestyle he hadn't earned. He counted on my trust, my ignorance, my willingness to believe that my own brother wouldn't steal from me. He was wrong. I didn't destroy Richard. He destroyed himself the moment he decided that money mattered more than integrity, that greed mattered more than family, that he could steal from his own sister and sleep soundly at night. The $287,000 I recovered sits in a trust now. Half of it is mine to live on, to ensure my own security in my later years. The other half is Tyler's. For university, for his future, for the life his grandfather tried to steal from him, along with everything else. Every Wednesday, I visit the cemetery where my mother is buried. I bring fresh flowers and sit with her for a while. I tell her about Tyler, about his football matches, his exam results, his dry sense of humor that reminds me so much of Thomas. I tell her that justice was served, that Richard didn't get away with it, that her estate, her life's work, is being used the way she intended, to help family, to build futures, to create something good, and I tell her that I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. That I trusted too easily, that I let grief and exhaustion blind me to the truth. But I also tell her that I'm proud of what I did once I knew. I didn't stay silent. I didn't let him win. I didn't accept the crumbs he threw me while he feasted on her legacy. I fought back, and I won. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something important. If you're watching this, if you've stayed until the end, please do 3 things. First, check your own family estates. If you're a beneficiary and the executor is taking too long, being vague, sending small payments without proper accounting, ask questions. Demand transparency. It's your legal right. Second, subscribe to Her Side of the Story. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear it. These stories matter. They save people from being exploited. Third, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether this story resonated with you. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in their kitchen right now, wondering why their inheritance is taking so long, trusting their sibling, their relative, their executor, and maybe, just maybe, my story will help them see the truth before it's too late. My name is Judith Whitmore. I'm 71 years old now. I'm a widow, a retired teacher, and a guardian to a 15-year-old boy who calls me Aunt Judith, but feels more like a son. My brother stole $701,000 from our mother's estate. He's in prison. I got my money back, and I got something even more valuable. I got Tyler, I got the truth, and I got to look my brother in the eye and watch him face the consequences of his greed. That's my story. That's how a brother's betrayal became a grandson's salvation. And that's why you should never ever assume that family means honest. Trust is earned, not owed, even when it's blood, especially when it's blood. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Please subscribe the channel Her Side of the Story. Thanks for watching until here.